My name is Kent Daniel, and I'm a professor here in the Finance and Economics group, and I teach in the capital markets area. I work in an area that's broadly known as behavioral finance, and this is at the intersection of psychology and economics. So specifically what we think about is how individuals participating in the marketplace process information and how this makes its way into prices. And in particular, what I'm interested in is where they make mistakes in processing information. So kind of the dominant paradigm in economics and finance is still the efficient markets hypothesis, meaning that the market works pretty well. And incorporating this information into prices reflect what the security is really worth in terms of its future cash flows. We're now finding a lot of evidence that's inconsistent with this. I started out as an undergraduate. I was a physicist, and I worked actually in the aerospace industry for a few years, and then went back to get my MBA. Got my MBA, but became very interested in kind of the very mathematical side of finance, and specifically questions of how you test the various models that people had been developing. Well, what I found was that these very mathematical models that relied on strict rationality of individuals, believing that everybody processed information perfectly, didn't do a very good job of describing the way prices really behaved. So I started working at this intersection of psychology and finance, where basically we tried to take some of the evidence that came from the experimental psychology field on how people use information, where they make mistakes, where there are biases in the way they use this information, to try and better understand how security prices move around. It turns out, after about a dozen years as a professor, I moved to Goldman Sachs and worked there for just over 5 years, working in the investment management area. So basically trying to take some of these ideas and helping them to better manage portfolios. And now within the last year, I've come back with, I think, some new insights from that experience and trying to, move further in this direction of taking some of the, what we know about human behavior, and again, with a little more insight into how markets actually work from this practical experience, trying to push my research forward on that dimension. I'm working with one investment manager right now to help their individual investors avoid mistakes in constructing their own portfolio, because people tend to become overconfident about their ability to forecast how well certain securities are going to do. They panic when you get into a market crisis, something like what we saw in 2008, 2009. One of the things that I do is I run a number of experiments in the classroom where, for example, we'll bring money in and they'll have an opportunity to win money, and we'll have bets, this kind of thing. And then they can see instances where they don't necessarily use all the information in an optimal way. Then that gives us a stepping off point to think about how these sorts of mistakes, these sorts of biases might make their way into security market prices.